is rising on a new era of energy in India. In 2024, India added over 24 gigawatts of solar power, a record breaking milestone. This isn't just an energy transition, it's about changing the way we are powering our houses, businesses, and future. With some of the highest solar potential in the world, India is sitting on a solar gold mine. But the big question is who truly benefits from this solar boom? We have heard Prime Minister Modi's vision of households with zero electricity bills and even the potential to earn from solar power through initiatives like PM Surya Ghar Muft Bijli Yojana. But how realistic is this promise for every Indian, especially middle income and lower income families? Can solar power truly reach every home and every community? What policies and innovations are driving affordable solar adoption in India? And as India positions itself as a global leader in solar energy, what role do we play on the world stage? Welcome to She Talks Green, where we break down the biggest climate and sustainability stories with the experts shaping the future. To share India's solar story, I am honored to be joined by Dr. Ajay Mathur, Director General of the International Solar Alliance. Dr. Mathur leads the world's first of its kind multilateral organization dedicated to accelerating global solar growth. Before heading ISA, he was Director General of TERI, a key architect of India's climate policies and a key figure in the Paris Climate Agreement negotiations. His work has shaped everything from India's energy efficiency programs to global clean energy transitions. He has been a member of the Prime Minister's Council on Climate Change, co chaired the Energy Transitions Commission, and he was part of the IPCC team that won the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize. Dr. Mathur, welcome to She Talk Screen. It's a privilege to have you with us, and I'm excited to dive into this conversation with you.
Arpita, many, many thanks. I am delighted to be part of this conversation, and I look forward to discovering a lot of new things, or at least a lot of new insights on this conversation.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, I'll start with something big that has happened this year. Drill, baby, drill. This is exactly what what the president of United States said. One of the largest oil and gas producing nations and the highest carbon emitter. Now, with the US withdrawing from the 2015 Paris Agreement, and you were part of the negotiations, this development marks a significant setback for global climate action, particularly at a time where we are seeing climate disasters intensifying and impacting everyone. Now, this decision also further deepens the challenges faced by developing nations like India because climate finance is a pain point, and this is going to impact that further for developing countries. How do you view this decision affecting India's energy transition strategies, particularly with our ambitious renewable energy goals and its positions in global markets?
I think there will be two major repercussions. Uh, I should first say that one of the things which will not change is the amount of solar that is part of the US electricity mix. And that's primarily because solar is the cheapest form of electricity where the sun is shining. For almost every territorial jurisdiction, the 50 states that occur in the US. And therefore, for economic purposes, the distribution companies will continue to buy solar electricity when they get it. And when they don't get it, the existing production capacity, often formed for fossil fuels, will continue to make it as it is today. Now, the places where it will have an impact is number one, a lot of resources have been promised. For example, for Africa to develop renewable electricity, but you need preparatory money. And the US was a major source of preparatory money through its official and non official aid sources. That is something that is going to is drying up and will dry up more in the future. That's the first. The second is the US has been a key country that has pushed various kinds of agreements and ways of moving ahead. So, whether it was the Paris Agreement or whether it is the creation of then the push through the clean energy ministerial to push renewables, the US leadership in both of these will be missing. We will need to see if other countries can step up to the plate.
I think certainly, sir. US plays a key role, not only in the world moving to cleaner fuels and energy, but also supporting the energy transition across developing nations. Now, India has set an ambitious target of achieving 500 gigawatt of non-fossil fuel-based capacity by 2030, which is in 5 years. In 2024 alone, we saw a significant milestone by adding more than 24 gigawatt of solar capacity, which is a twofold increase in installations compared to 2023, bringing solar energy to 47% of our total renewable capacity. This is the highest annual solar capacity addition to date. Sir, can you share your insights on what has led to this remarkable progress? What makes solar energy India's flagship success in its energy transition journey?
Well, first of all, India has seen, politically seen, and you hear this time and again in the various pronouncements made by the Prime Minister, including the setting up of the International Solar Alliance, which I am proud to represent today. The political commitment to solar energy is very clear. This occurs through uh, first the incentives that were provided for solar electricity, uh, and we saw the prices drop from 18 rupees a kilowatt hour to currently somewhere around 2.5 rupees a kilowatt hour. This is amazing. But the second point is that this has been helped by global decline in the costs of solar. This has occurred primarily because of competition, because of the increasing of the scale of the market. And the third reason is that as India has gone ahead, we have not we have not uh, hesitated to learn from the experiences. So therefore, you have had policies which have been changing. So we went in for a feed-in tariff policy of 18 rupees, 7 rupees, etc. per kilowatt hour. Then moved to auctions, went to 5 rupees a kilowatt hour, 4 rupees kilowatt hour. Then we moved into reverse auctions, and that has led to the current price of 2 to 2.5 rupees per kilowatt hour. I would think that the political commitment, the ability to learn, and the global decline in prices have together contributed to India's success as a nation that has taken solar as at its heart. It also helps that we are in the tropics, and therefore solar is available all the time, all over the country. And therefore, it makes sense for us to develop solar as the energy source of choice.
Absolutely. So we have roughly 5 years to reach the 500 gigawatt clean energy goal. Now, with the national electricity plan targeting about 320 gigawatt of solar capacity by 2030, we would be required to deploy an average of, let's say, around 44 gigawatt of solar capacity annually. How prepared is India to sustain this growth trajectory? And what policies or financial mechanisms or regulatory frameworks do you think would be required to ensure this kind of growth and sustaining this kind of growth? Because we are still dependent on coal for most of our energy requirements, and industrial and consumer energy demands are surging as the population is growing up, as the spending capacity is increasing. We are seeing an increase in the energy demands as well. So, how do you strike a balance between the competing priorities and our net zero commitments for 2070, or even the 2030 goal that we have?
So, Arpita, first of all, there are no competing priorities now. And why do I say that? Because in 2024, there were four auctions, and not small, large auctions, 600 megawatts, 1000 megawatts, 2000 megawatts, and so on. And in these four round the clock renewable electricity tenders, and these were met by solar plus wind plus storage, we had prices for electricity of less than 5 rupees per kilowatt hour. Why is this crucial? Because in the same period, all new coal power stations that were commissioned to provide electricity at more than 5 rupees per kilowatt hour. This means that economically, the case for round the clock renewable electricity has been made. So, first of all, we don't need to worry about solar during the day and something else during the night. This is the cheapest. The second is that what it has done is, now if you go to a bank and ask for a loan for a coal project, the bank will say, but this renewable electricity is cheaper. The questions have therefore shifted from the price of electricity to the availability of land. Where will we set up this plant? The availability of transmission lines to evacuate the electricity made by renewables, and therefore, uh, because renewable power plants typically take 2 years, and transmission lines takes 3 years plus to be built. This means that if transmission lines follow renewable energy projects, we will always have delays. And the third point is that while the cost of electricity is cheaper, as I said, less than 5 rupees a kilowatt hour, the investment costs, the first costs are much higher. They're almost double that of coal power plants. But of course, you don't have to pay for coal. And so the electricity is cheaper. It is these issues of land, lines, and money that we need to resolve in order to move ahead. So reaching the 320 goal will not be a problem as far as the costs are concerned, but it will be a problem if we don't solve these policy problems.
Sir, I see that we are definitely making, we are definitely making a good progress in the supply side. What about the demand side? Because right now, there are no such policies, perhaps incentives for making me, let's say, or making it mandatory for, let's say, me to buy renewable energy. So, how do we take care of the demand side as well?
Generally speaking, the government of India has focused on a policy that as long as on the supply side you can supply electricity, which is renewables, then you and I as consumers will buy it. And now that it is cost effective, we will buy it at the same price as which we buy fossil fuel electricity, or prices may become cheaper. That's one part. But the second part is what we had earlier spoken about, the PM Muft Bijli Yojana, which is largely for solar rooftops. And there we are looking at homes which are provided with electricity which is less than cost, and therefore 3 years worth of subsidy is provided upfront. And after that, there is no subsidy need by the government at all. So, to me, that is a very powerful way of enabling you and I to have solar electricity on our roofs if we have the roofs, of course.
Sir, I'll come to this rural side of this story because while certainly I would make a choice due to several reasons and cost being one of them, that I would go for renewable energy or putting up solar panels. But the solar story is not I would say even across every state due to several reasons. There is technical challenges, there is DISCOM challenges, as well as there is even in the residential space. The bigger houses or the bigger homes are definitely going to get benefited. But what about middle to lower income houses? Because ownership of the house is also a problem. Plus, the space is also a problem because to put solar panels, we need some space, we need good sunlight. So, how are we ensuring that solar power is not just reaching the cities, but it is also reaching the millions in rural areas who are still lacking access to reliable electricity in general?
Arpita, this actually needs several kinds of innovation. One is innovation on business models that can enable standalone solar electricity systems in rural India, whether they are for charging, whether they are for as solar mini grids for homes. UP and Bihar have issued policies for solar mini grids, and that has been very, very successful. The second issue in rural areas, it's solar mini grids are largely used to cover for erratic electricity supply. The second is that for areas where there isn't enough roof, or if the roof isn't strong enough, that's where we need innovation. We need solar panels which are not so expensive, or solar modules that are not so heavy, and solar modules that can be placed, for example, on the walls of buildings rather than only on roofs. In other words, we need innovation as far as technology is concerned in order to take care of the unserved from the Surya Muft Ghar Yojana.
Certainly, sir, because when we talk about equitable growth in solar specifically, we have to come up with innovative ways and technologies so that electricity is affordable and accessible in rural India as well. Now, coming to the DISCOM, sir, the electricity distribution companies, DISCOMs in India, they struggle to manage the rising share of renewable energy. And this is a known fact that they have been struggling financially for decades, uh, with an accumulated deficit reaching around 6.5 lakh crore in 2022-2023 year. Uh, there are several other challenges, outdated incentives, or the challenges of balancing power across the grid. They need a more equitable distribution of renewable powers risk. Are DISCOMs equipped to handle the growing share of renewable energy in India's power mix? And how can the government and the private sector collaborate to modernize transmission and distribution infrastructure to optimize the energy flow and integrate renewables effectively? Because that is another area where we certainly have to step up. And I would certainly ask you about what innovative financing mechanisms do you think can really play a big role in reducing DISCOM's financial dependencies?
Arpita, that is $1 million question. The answer lies in finding the areas of convergence between solar energy or green energy on the one hand and between reducing the financial losses of the electricity companies on the other. So, for example, look at the availability of electricity to agricultural pumps. This is in rural areas. This is where the utilities make the largest losses. So, what happened was that in Maharashtra, the MSEDCL, the Maharashtra State Electricity Distribution Company Limited, they said, okay, at the rural substations, it costs them 7 rupees 48 paisa by their own estimation before the Maharashtra LCD Regulatory Commission to supply electricity from the grid. But if they developed solar panels at the rural substations, the cost is coming to 3 rupees per kilowatt hour. Now, that electricity is available during the day and is made available during the day to the agricultural pumps. The farmer is better off, the utility is better off, and the world is better off. So, here is a way in which you can see the convergence of interests occurring. They, MSCTs went ahead and did the pilot. They liked it. There was so much benefits that now they've gotten into a loan being provided by the World Bank so that they can do this at a large scale and do it through procurement, through e-procurement, which the World Bank and the government of India wants, and thus be able to create the infrastructure that is required for the rural substations to and the rural distribution companies to be able to be effective.
So, we discussed about DISCOMs, but I would also like to understand what role can innovative financing mechanisms such as green bonds or carbon trading, particularly, play in reducing DISCOMs' financial dependencies.
So, as far as green bonds is concerned, what they can do is, in a sense, reduce the cost of capital. So, by moving out investment money sooner, see, typically the loans that they get are for 6 or 7 or 8 years. What they can do is return the loan after 3 years, 2 years of installation and 1 year of operation. Why 3 years? Because in 3 years they can raise money from green bonds based on the returns that they are getting. So they already have 1 year of returns. On the basis of that, they can get financed by green bonds and return the money or the investment money to the bank. The bank can lend it to another project. But what it also does is there's cheaper domestic money that is then available uh, for the project itself. On the carbon credits, it's going to be uh, uh, for the distribution companies, it will be a little bit of a uh, effort to prove in every case that the project would not have happened without carbon fibers. So, for example, if you're talking of solar PV used for agricultural pumps, then you can. But if you can't use it for large scale solar because it's already so much cheaper than the existing electricity. So the key issue is you need to create the case that what you're doing with solar is actually cheaper than the cheapest option otherwise available with fossil fuels. This, as I said earlier, is this is the problem of additionality. It's easy to make the case with places where the distribution company is making a loss to places where it could possibly make a profit.
That makes sense, sir. I think we certainly have to come up with a variety of options to help the discoms, whether it is financing tools, whether it is innovative policies, whether it is government and private sector collaboration as well, to help them modernize transmissions
Exactly.
and distribution
So
infrastructure.
there are two parts which are absolutely essential as we move ahead. One is the energy, let me call it energy transition planning. We need to help all the distribution companies so that they can minimize their losses and maximize their, I will not say profits, but maximize their revenues by ensuring that people get electricity at the times when they need it. So, energy transition planning is the first. The second is that for a lot of actions by the distribution companies, we need to understand where the losses are happening. So, digital twinning, I remember I'm not saying modeling, I'm saying digital twinning of actions by the distribution companies on a digital platform is essential so as to find out how they can operate better.
Sir, because we are also talking about how the infrastructure we can strengthen. Another challenge here is about the storage as well. So India's energy storage deficit during non-solar hours poses a significant challenge for us. How are we addressing this challenge to ensure a consistent and reliable energy supply during non-solar hours? And what incentives do you think are necessary to accelerate storage technology adoption as well as development? Because the coal capacity might rise with modest storage reductions, storage cost reductions. So, how do you see that?
There is no doubt that we need to push storage much harder. Thankfully, today, solar plus wind plus storage, the electricity costs less round the clock than fossil fuel or coal based electricity. However, for solar and batteries or for wind and battery alone, this challenge has yet to be breached. Now, what it means is that we need to have uh, goals over 2 years, over 5 years, over 7 years on the prices that we want to achieve, the efficiencies which we want to achieve with solar and storage. Because what that will do is it will encourage the electricity companies, the distribution companies to meet those. It will encourage them to work with industry who supplies solar panels on the one side and storage on the other side to reduce their costs. And it will encourage the R&D community who support those industries to also come in. This is the only way of going ahead. We have seen in India that R&D has been successful when you work with ISRO or defense, where the demand is clear. So by linking the demand with R&D, you are creating the atmosphere for this kind of bridging to occur. You're also creating a demand for solar prices to drop. It could be helped by R&D money being put into batteries. It could be helped by, as we are doing right now, the performance linked incentive be also provided to batteries. In general, I think, as Arpita, to one of your earlier questions, I had said that one of the reasons why the solar prices have uh, been decreasing in India and the effectiveness of solar has been because we continuously learn from our policy experience. We change the policies. So similarly in batteries, we'll have to see whether PLI works, whether we want to move to something else, whether we how on earth do we get the distribution companies, the providers of solar cells and batteries, and the R&D institutions involved. All of this is a learning process, and we will have to essentially do it in order to come to an understanding.
Right, sir. I think R&D certainly is a key area for India to invest more, and not just the government, but the overall ecosystem definitely needs to focus more on R&D. Now, talking about um, focusing on R&D, looking for innovative technologies, artificial intelligence, AI, has certainly emerged as a key enabler across sectors globally. Now, there is a lot of potential of using AI with respect to modernizing grids, optimizing energy distribution, improving storage, and even addressing the power flow across the grids. Now, these technologies certainly can help bridge the equity gap and ensure affordable energy access, especially for rural communities. And we have seen some successful examples that I know of, like Kenya's AI powered mini grids. They have been a very successful example of how you can enhance your energy distribution. What advancements is India making in adopting such technologies to optimize its solar energy infrastructure and improve efficiency?
AI is being widely used in the private sector. So wherever we have good applications where the return to the private company is based on the amount of electricity that they supply, either through solar mini grids or even for large plants, we see AI being used. So, for example, AI is currently being used in predicting the future 2 hours to 4 hours, the future generation of electricity from solar panels. Because if clouds are happening, somewhere, and based on past experience, AI can tell you what will be the amount of electricity that will be generated or non generated. Similarly, if you are looking at battery performance, it can be used, AI can be used for predictive maintenance uh, in cells. So, for example, one of the places where it is used very often, AI right now, is in predicting where cracks can occur in solar panels. So, whether it is forecasting, whether it is predictive maintenance, or it is about the long term effects of the solar on your life and mind. So, our behavioral performance, those are the kinds of places where AI is currently being used in the system.
Right. I think AI certainly has a lot of potential, and the government certainly is focusing on AI. We have seen that in the union budget as well.
Yeah. So, I think the key issue is where in the energy system will they be used? And I think goals of enhancing performance or setting up mechanisms by which people's returns, the company's returns, are based on how well they perform. And then the company adopts anything that can be used to enhance its performance, including AI.
One thing certainly that emerges out of the market is the dominance of Chinese solar panels, or China dominates the global solar manufacturing market. I think it is holding over 80% of the production capacity across all key stages of the supply chain, whether it is polysilicon, wafer, cell, module manufacturing. I know even in the union budget this time, there's a lot of focus on domestic manufacturing. But with all the new announcements, incentives, how do you see India stepping up in its solar manufacturing capabilities and reducing its dependencies on imports? Because I certainly see that there's a lot of potential for us to emerge as a global leader in solar technologies and exports, and a lot of focus certainly is on how India has performed in this space over the last few years itself.
You are absolutely right. We do see this concentration of manufacturing in one country, China. And if we are looking at a increase of solar usage by 3 times to 8 times by 2030, and the 3 to 8 range is depending on the fact whether you use solar electricity for generating green hydrogen, whether you use solar electricity for generating cars, and that is why there is a variation. But at the very minimum, it will be 3 times. We need to make shorter supply chains, because what we have seen is that the supply chains, because of the concentration that occurs, we are seeing that the supply, there's a choking of the supply chains. Therefore, we looked at the economics of solar manufacturing, and I'll break it up into two parts. So, you start with semiconductor grade silicon, then you make wafers, then you make ingots, then you cut them into wafers. Wafers are cut into cells, and cells are put together as modules. Now, solar cells to solar modules makes economic sense almost anywhere if the demand is adequate. That means you can have 10 to 12 to 15 places in the world where they import solar cells and make solar modules. You create local jobs, you create local value added, because then you also add things like inverters and so on, inverters, relays, etc. But making solar cells is not cost effective. So, countries will need to provide at least short term incentives to be able to compete with solar manufacturing out of China. Now, in China, the total number of manufacturers are nearly 100. The total manufacturing capacity is almost 3 times the availability, or I think twice. Right now, it's twice. Twice the availability, twice the total demand for solar right now. We, therefore, they've also invested a huge bit in R&D. We therefore see that you need short-term incentives to be able to compete with that price. Now, in the US, this was being provided through the Inflation Reduction Act. In India, it's being provided through the Performance Linked Incentive Program and so on. In other words, you need short-term investments to compete with the Chinese exports. However, however, there are two ways out. One is we need to focus on technologies that are still developing. So instead of solar panels as they are, focusing on flexible solar, solar made on plastic sheets, which can be put on windows, which can be put on glasses, which can be put on roofs, which are otherwise too weak to hold solar panels, all of those would be useful. The second is we need to create a infrastructure for R&D in these non-traditional areas. For example, right now we are talking of perovskite films or solar cells. Perovskite films are extremely, the the loss in efficiency per year is very high, and therefore they are coated. You cover them on all sides with semiconductors. So these tandem cells, perovskite and silicon on top, these make great sense. It will be great if we can develop a research infrastructure which helps the development of these. So therefore, for India to focus on new technologies and create a ecosystem, complete ecosystem, manufacturing, but also R&D, so that it's not only today's technologies, but tomorrow's technologies also that are developed and used by these manufacturers. That is what would help us move ahead.
Right. I think that's a great insight on how we deal with this opportunity, and I'm going to call it an opportunity. Since we are talking about some of the market challenges, another key challenge that has emerged is how India is addressing the issue of land acquisition for larger scale renewable energy projects, particularly for solar installations, because we are looking at balancing the rights and livelihoods of local communities here. And there has been some recent farmer protest in India where they raised concerns about displacement or the loss of agricultural income and the potential impact on food security as well. Now, in this context, how can agri-photovoltaic systems, which integrate agriculture with solar energy production, how can we leverage to create a sustainable solution that not only aligns with India's ambitious renewable energy goals, but also helps the community to address some of these challenges that they are raising, and focus on the food security aspect of the discussion as well.
You are absolutely right. Agri photovoltaics have this huge opportunity. However, everything does not grow well with things solar photovoltaics in the field. So, for example, with rice and wheat, we have limited success. It's much more successful with things like tomatoes, with things like chilies. So, what will grow with PV in different agroclimatic zones? We need a white paper on that. So, the International Solar Alliance is today working with uh, I think with GIZ, the German agency, in putting out agri-photovoltaic demonstrations in 10 different agroclimatic zones to learn what can grow and what cannot grow, what will be the kind of economics that will be associated by number one, sale of electricity, number two, sale of agricultural products, because we want it to increase, not decrease. The second problem is about how do you connect these? Because in India, the average part size is relatively small. If each of these is connected to the grid, the management problems become very huge. So you need a business model that could help us in aggregating the solar agri photovoltaic over several agricultural fields and provide a common connection to the grid. And then also that we are the money that we get from the sale of electricity, we are able to distribute to all of these people. So creating a policy for that is essential. And that policy can be formed by the central government, but would have to be issued by the distribution companies in order for the agri photovoltaic revolution to occur.
I mean, it certainly sounds like a promising technology, and certainly more work needs to go into exploring this technology.
Right. So you also need technologies where if it is put, if the agri photovoltaics are put vertically, they can still have relatively high solar production as opposed to being flat.
Um, Moving on to the solar panel waste management, another key area that where we need to focus more, because with the rapid expansion of solar installations, the concern about the life cycle management of solar panels are also emerging. And India's installed solar capacity of about 66 gigawatt as of financial year 23 has already produced approximately 100 kilotons of waste, a figure projected to rise to 340 kilotons by 2030, which is like next 5 years. you know what strategies are we exploring to address this challenge of waste management and sustainability in the solar sector?
So, Arpita, you're absolutely right. That is the amount, the numbers that you gave is the amount of solar waste that would be created because of the solar panels that are installed. The waste is actually created when they go out of use. That means 20 years after the beginning. Now, having said that, right now, in the absence of anything else, we are covering the solar panels by the electronic waste rules, which essentially say that the guy who supplied them is responsible for taking care of the waste and see that it does not reach the land. Now, because of the long life of solar, it is not very clear whether even the guys who imported the solar cells or made the solar cells would be in operation when the life ends. That is number one. So, therefore, you need to have a collection of money right in the beginning to enable the collection to occur when they actually fail. This means that we need to start adding a surcharge of a few paise per per watt, a rupee per watt actually, to create this collection fund which is invested by a bank and made available at the time when the waste is created. So this is for collection and for recycling. Now the next question is recycling. What technology do you have for recycling? So right now the technologies that we have is that the glass is broken and separated, reused. The back panel, which is steel or aluminum, is separated out and recycled. But the solar panel itself, it is much less in weight than what we were talking, but it is even then it is there. We are not separating out the material that go into making the solar cell. Also think of the solar panels that were made 25 years ago. They were made very differently from the solar cells which are made today. And we can imagine that the solar cell industry 25 years from now will be very different from the solar industry of today. In other words, the recycling of today will not work tomorrow. So the only way out is that we separate out all the materials. This means that today we put into place that allow standards for manufacturing that allow the materials to be completely recyclable. Then you can have recycling machines which enable that. So there are two things that we need to do today. One is having this collection of the money for collection and recycling, so creating a fund. And the second is creating the standards. As the International Solar Alliance, we are working on both of them to help our member countries. There's also a third issue. For several countries, the volumes, even at peak, may not be large enough. So you will need to move used panels from one country to another. Now that is movement of toxic wastes, which comes under the Basel Convention. And therefore, we would need Basel Convention clearances to be able to move from one country to the other. In which case, are portable recycling machines better? These are issues that we will need to address now in order to address these issues which will occur in the future.
I think it is definitely an area where we need to work
Focus
more.
on.
And
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
absolutely. Because as we are making growth and a
Mhm.
great success story, we certainly cannot leave
At the
behind.
at the
Yes,
same time as the success story, we are also sowing the seeds of possible problems.
yes,
We
yes.
need to avoid that.
The Indian government has implemented various policies, some of it we have discussed today, to promote solar energy. One very recent one and the most famous one is the PM Surya Ghar Muft Bijli Yojana. You've heard our PM promoting this across all platforms, talking about how this has the potential to really bring down our electricity bills to zero in most cases. For our listeners, can we break down how really, how can policies such as these really benefit the common people, and what kind of cost savings are we talking about here?
So, this is a very India specific question. So, I'll give very India specific answers. The first thing is that you, as a potential user, can apply on the website, which is all India website. So, you choose the town and it gives you a list of vendors. Now, this is the cost that it will be. They will quote you a cost. Then, generally speaking, the vendors who are listed collect the subsidies on their own. So you don't need to worry about it. You get a solar system and you pay for it. Now, what happens is that certainly during the life of the solar plant, 25 years or whatever, it starts generating electricity, which meets all your electricity needs during the day. Now, all of us are used to having batteries at home which work with inverters. So, you can also do some amount of storage for use at night. But otherwise, you are buying electricity at night. And if you put enough storage, you can even meet all your needs. So, the one time investment in solar panels in the beginning and in batteries can help you completely disconnect from the grid. But I would not recommend so. My suggestion is that yes, do have some batteries, but allow for the grid to take some of the electricity which is in excess of what you need and keep the electricity connection. So suddenly you have a demand which is much more than the production. Especially the early morning hours or the night hours, you have the distribution company connection to. Now, you'd obviously have to pay for what you buy. But in general, in general, on an average, what you pay for and what you get paid for what you put into the grid can become approximately equal. That is the reason why you and I, if we have the roof space, go in for solar today.
I think opting for solar certainly makes a lot of sense. And certainly, I think the government is pushing for it, and I think people should start looking into it. How do you foresee the government's policy landscape in evolving to align with India's aggressive renewable energy targets, particularly around incentives, subsidies, waivers? Is there a clear strategy to phase out solar incentives over time without hampering the growth that we are seeing in the sector today?
Arpita, I will take you to the large scale solar parks. We have seen how the price has dropped from 18 rupees to 12 rupees to 8 rupees to 5 rupees. And finally, it has settled down at between 2 and 2.5 rupees per kilowatt hour. Right? So earlier on, I think till it was more than 5 rupees a kilowatt hour, there was a explicit subsidy because we got this through the renewable energy obligations in the Electricity Act. Every state DISCOM was expected to buy. So you as a consumer subsidize the solar electricity by from the other electricity that you are getting. But once it became less than 5 rupees, then we weren't providing a subsidy. This is actually the cheapest option. So we have actually moved from a subsidized regime to a non-subsidized regime because the price kept reducing. This is where I think the economies of scale work. We need to see similar economies of scale on the battery side as well. The battery prices, by the way, have dropped about 80% in the last 10 years. We need them to drop about 20% more for solar and batteries to become viable across the entire 24 hours. So we need to focus on, okay, let me rephrase this. What is important is that we are able to learn from experience. Learning from experience makes it very difficult to say that I will phase out incentives here. I will have mandatory requirements for solar here. But as long as we are willing to learn from experience, and the Indian experience is that we had, in solar, we have certainly learned from experience. The prices keep going down and it becomes viable for each one of us, whether it is at the solar farm level or it is at the rooftop solar level. In all of these, solar electricity becomes cost effective. So I don't think it is possible to have a firm roadmap, but as long as we learn from experience, we can go ahead.
I think certainly the experience, not just how we have seen progress in solar, but other sectors as well, should help us address this phasing out and ensuring a sustainable growth in a much better way. Um, in this sector, specifically, attracting private investment has remained a bit challenging, I would say. And we certainly have seen this from experience as well, that public private partnerships are going to definitely play a crucial role in scaling our solar energy projects and the growth that we are discussing today. How can private sector investments be better channelized into the emerging areas like storage or grid modernization? And what kind of regulatory or financial support that we are able to provide to these private sector to enhance the participation? I know some announcements have been made during the union budget that was presented very recently. But how do you see that? Do you see more opportunities in this space?
So I actually foresee that solar is becoming the economically the most viable alternative for electricity supplied to your house and mine, to your office and mine, to your workplace and mine. What it essentially means is that we have to, uh, I'm saying something which I said earlier, we have to keep learning. But more importantly, the issue is that, uh, economics works so the private sector can invest. Now, what we need to do is to enhance the confidence of the private sector to invest in this. That's where public policies come. So, by having institutions like the Solar Energy Corporation of India, which buys in bulk and then sells to electricity distribution company, you're taking away one of the risks that the private sector faces. So the lower the risks you can create through public policy, certainty of regulation, for example, lowering the interest rate at which money becomes available for solar. Those are the kinds of public policy actions that will help more and more private sector money to come. And this is what, for example, in Madhya Pradesh, they did a solar project in Jiva where the uptake of solar energy was by the Delhi metro. The regulatory system was clear. The monies that were to be invested were made available by the World Bank, and then the private sector was invited to tender. And that was very successful. You got the lowest price. That was the first uh, uh, tender in which we got prices of solar electricity less than the cost of fossil fuel electricity. So, reducing risks through public actions enhances private sector participation.
So, as someone who has been at the forefront of renewable energy advocacy and global climate action, how do you reflect on the progress made under your leadership, both at the ISA and beyond? And what do you hope will be the lasting legacy of your work in advancing solar energy adoption worldwide?
uh, okay, let me answer this in three parts. The first is that I believe the work in India, the work at the global level in the climate negotiations and at the International Solar Alliance has enhanced global confidence in solar energy. That solar energy works, that solar energy is cost effective, that solar electricity can meet my needs when I need electricity. I think those are questions that have been answered. That's number one. The second is that we have moved towards a regime in which the we understand the risks associated with private sector investment in solar electricity. And therefore, the kinds of, uh, let me say, mechanisms such as guarantees to help solar is far better understood than it was earlier. And therefore, now we are looking through ISA at providing guarantees globally so that we can enhance the private sector investment in solar energy. And the third is that there are very different circumstances in developed countries, in the large developing countries such as India, in the smaller developing countries, and in the small island developing countries. So, four categories, but there are very different needs. If you look at the developed countries, what you're looking at is that the electricity consumption per capita is more or less constant. It's supposed to increase, but it's more or less constant. What it means is that during the day, they can keep on adding solar because solar electricity is cheaper than any other electricity that they have. And at night, they have adequate capacity, existing capacity to meet those needs. They are therefore focusing on how to increase solar during the day, therefore, efficiency of solar cells. As far as countries like India are concerned, the large developing countries, you've got very fast growth. And this growth occurs at the day or at night. So if I add solar for the day, then the question is, what do I do at night for the enhanced electricity use? That means I set up a fossil fuel plant. If I set up a fossil fuel plant, why do I need a coal power plant? A solar plant? The what do I do at night will meet both the day. That is where I think public policy matters. And I think the Indian experience in this round the clock renewable electricity being cheaper than round the clock fossil fuel electricity matters. What this means is battery development becomes very important. The third category of countries is the smaller developing countries. And in many, many smaller developing countries, you don't even have grids across the country. So, what we did was we looked at the kinds of costs and we found that the costs of grid extension and providing electricity were higher, what was more costly than solar mini grids, solar plus batteries, which means that they can use solar mini grids to meet the energy access demands that they have. And then finally, the very special needs of small island states. Let me give you an example. If you go from the large island of Fiji to the small island, you'll go by boat. Those boats run on diesel. Where are the electric boats? They need to be developed in countries such as India, to be sold in countries such as Fiji. But is anybody working on them? So these are the kinds of challenges that we foresee. And these are the very, very different kinds of circumstances that occur in different kinds of countries. Therefore, one of the things that I hope we will all learn from is that there are at least four very different strategies for solar development as we go ahead.
With ISA's evolving role in driving solar adoption globally, what do you see as the most critical areas of focus in the coming years? How can ISA further enhance international collaboration to address challenges like technology transfer, financing, and equitable energy access, particularly for developing countries like India?
Arpita, I think there are four areas of focus. The first is that what is important is that analysis based on data, or this applies for all countries, developed and developing countries. So, for example, the question that you raised on manufacturing, that applies to all countries. Or how is technology moving? How are the investments moving? So, for example, we found that while the investments, 76% of investments were in the developed countries and in China and in India and in Brazil, all of Africa, the investment was just 3%. So, looking at these kinds of things is important. And this is for all countries. The second is capacity building. Whenever I talk to a country leader, the first thing that they ask me is, okay, we agree that solar makes great sense. Who will do it? And therefore, we have started working with countries on creating capacity, people, institutions, providing people with certification at the end of training so that they can get jobs in the market. So that's the second. And for example, we have created something called STAR Centers, Solar Technology and Applications Resource Centers, in 10 different countries to be able to provide locally relevant capacity building, knowledge management as is needed. The third is, how do you enable the regulations to, number one, allow private sector investment instead of government investment. Number two, to allow investment in the renewable sector rather than in the fossil fuel sector. We are working with a huge number of countries on enabling this change in policy making. This is important because at the end of the day, whether the private sector invests or not depends on whether these kinds of changes are available or not. So that's the third thing that we do. And together with it is enabling finance. So, for example, I talked of the ISA having a guarantee facility which enables money to come in. That is to enable, once you've got the policy changes, you need money to flow. And this provides comfort to the investors that they will get a return. The fourth thing is helping in developing projects. Because while there is a lot of money for projects, there is almost no money available for project development. And therefore, focusing on developing those projects, on creating the kinds of consultants in those countries who can prepare those projects and they are bankable to do the studies. For example, you need geological studies that the land on which the solar panel is there is strong enough to take it. Doing those kinds of studies becomes important. And in many, many countries, particularly the smallest countries, we work also on creating the first kind of demo projects so that people can see the benefits that renewables get to them and can convince their political leadership that these are the kinds of these are the kinds of scaling up that will bring benefit to us. So those are the four kinds of things that ISA has been doing and will continue to do.
This was very insightful, sir. And this is where we come to the end of our discussion. But whenever I close any discussion, I certainly focus on one very integral part of all the conversations that we are doing for climate action: public awareness and participation, because that's a very key aspect of all energy transition conversations that we are doing today. So I'm going to leave the listeners with one message from you. What initiatives you think individuals and communities can undertake to adopt solar energy solutions? And not just solar, but generally sustainable practices.
So, Arpita, two things. First is that we need to have we need to invest in solar on rooftops. We need to be involved in the development of solar for livelihoods. So when you and I can make a living, for example, if you are solar cooled rooms, then if you are a farmer, you can keep your produce in the solar cold room and sell it as and when the market is right for it, rather than being forced to sell it when it is going bad. These are the ways in which solar enters your life and mine. As far as the future is concerned, we see solar as providing a huge variety of jobs, whether it is on technology development, but also on the provision of goods and services to people, also on the availability of solar to do many things. For example, in rural areas in India, there were many things we could not do because electricity wasn't available. But for example, solar charging systems make it possible to have electric vehicles. Uh, Solar pumps makes it possible to have two crops per year. In other words, solar has the capacity to change our lives. I'd like to see a lot more solar startups as we go on.
Certainly. And your message to our young climate leaders and youth aspiring to become part of this sector, this space.
So this space is very large, and you can get in by working on policy, by working on technology, by working on business models, by working on using solar in whatever work that you're doing. The key is perseverance. Perseverance matters. At the end of the day, how hard you work, how you're able to convince both policymakers on the one side, but more importantly, your neighbors matters. Keep at it and make a change.
Very useful advice, sir. I think you said it very rightly. While, of course, everyone is going to work across different areas, whether it is policy, industry, I always feel that the real success is that if I can bring a small change in my home and in my neighborhood, I think that's definitely a big win today. Thank you so much, sir. I think I loved the conversation, and I know that the listeners would be, we are leaving them with very useful information about solar, the success of solar in India, and we are only going to look forward because there's so many more milestones to achieve while India is going to become the largest economies in the world. Thank you so much, sir.
Arpita, many, many thanks. It was such a pleasure to take part with you in this podcast.
Thank you so much, sir. India's solar journey is more than just about energy. It's about empowerment, economic opportunity, and a cleaner future. In today's conversation, we explored India's remarkable progress in solar energy, the policies shaping this transformation, and the critical challenges that remain. From energy equity and DISCOM reforms to storage solutions and private sector participation, it's clear that while India is leading the charge in renewable energy, sustaining this momentum requires continuous innovation, investment, and collaboration. The road ahead is filled with big questions. How do we ensure energy access for every Indian, especially in rural areas? How can we scale solar energy without compromising livelihoods and land rights? How do we make solar truly sustainable from manufacturing to waste management? These are conversations that need to continue, not just in boardrooms and policy discussions, but within communities, among businesses, and at every household looking to make the shift to cleaner energy. If today's discussion sparked any thoughts, ideas, or questions, let's keep the conversation going. Drop your comments, share your views, and let's build a more informed and engaged community around green transition.